Jamie Foxx, Snoop, and Dave Franco team up in the vampire comedy Day Shift from Netflix. So is this worth watching, or should it have never seen the light of day? Bud is a hardworking, blue-collar dad who just wants to provide a good life for his quick-witted daughter. But his mundane San Fernando Valley pool cleaning job is really just a front for his source of income, hunting and killing vampires as part of an international union of vampire hunters. Jamie Foxx is Bud, a vampire hunter who needs to raise a bunch of cash in a very short amount of time in order to keep his estranged wife and daughter from having to move far away. Now, because vampire fangs are worth money, Bud attempts to work his butt off just in order to make the amount that he needs. Now, as part of his reinstatement to this vampire hunters union, he has an observer follow him, played by Dave Franco. But because of his actions, the vampires, they're just not too happy with Bud, so they look to even the score. Okay, so the story in this isn't new or even original. The vampires' motives are a bit like Pinky and the Brain, where I guess they're just trying to take over the world. Now, this is the most uninteresting portion of the film, where I just didn't care at all about why they were there and what they were trying to do. All we need to know is that vampires exist, there's a megalomaniacal leader, and she's holding a grudge. And then within the Vampire Hunter Union, there's this huge animosity towards Bud. This is only kind of defined, where it just doesn't feel solidly established. And for me, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it does make some massive antagonism that's displayed throughout a little difficult to understand or even get behind. So if the story isn't unique or even very interesting, why in the world would you want to watch this? Well, first, Jamie Foxx and Dave Franco, they're really funny, both individually and then together. They both have this subtle, matter-of-fact sarcasm that is delivered a lot of the time in very deadpan ways. Now, Fox's Bud is almost an everyman, just with a special set of skills. Now, he's doing his best to provide for his daughter, but he's also struggling along the way. And he's witty and a great fighter with a lot of smarts, but he's also up against this time crunch, making him desperate and motivated to take on jobs and risks that he probably normally wouldn't take. Franco is Seth, a by-the-book office jockey. Now, he gets assigned to follow Bud to make sure Bud isn't violating union protocols. I love how Seth is the fish out of water in this. He's not trained or equipped to do or see what Bud does, and yet he still has to follow along. Franco conveys the fear, confusion, and enthusiasm of the character convincingly, creating someone endearing and even charming. Plus, the way that he delivers a lot of his lines elicits easy chuckles, and he makes me want to keep seeing more of him. Now, Snoop isn't in this nearly as much as I thought he'd be, but he's certainly larger than life when he is. He's over the top, and he's casually cool, even in the midst of an onslaught of bloodsuckers. As fun as these characters are in this, the real driving force within the movie is the crazy action. In ways, some of it feels a bit like John Wick, but much less realistic. Bodies are thrown across the room when they're shot, vampires contort themselves into really creepy angles and then fold themselves like origami, and then heads fly when kicked repeatedly. And I didn't care at all about realism in these instances. The action is unhinged and it's brutal, with an intense and frenetic display of fists and bullets. Now, I laughed a lot of the time during many of the action sequences because of how ridiculous some of them became. There's a scene within a house fight that goes on for just several minutes with carnage up the wazoo. And then right in the middle of the fighting, one character runs out of ammunition and needs their partner to pass them a bullet. So you have to suspend all disbelief during this and enjoy it for the ludicrous display that it was. I literally laughed out loud in this part because it was just absurd, and I loved it. The filmmakers also take advantage of drones and the ability to shove cameras in really tight spaces in order to capture on-the-go action sequences. Now, while I do think the drone shots are mostly overused, there is a quick sequence that provided a unique shot in the middle of this extreme car chase. And within this chase, it starts out with a very cute sequence involving Bud's daughter. The tie-in with what she's viewing versus what we're seeing, I thought it was fun and then timed really well. The violence is brutal and it's crazy, with bloody carnage and extreme kills. I mean, if you're looking for dismemberment, beheadings, and massive chest wounds, this isn't going to disappoint. I'm glad that during the fight sequences, we don't have much shaky cam, and that a lot of the scenes we actually get to see the choreography play out. Now, there are still a bunch of quick cuts, but when these happen, it doesn't appear that the camera is trying to avoid poor fight moves, but instead just giving us the different angles of the zaniness. Now, one of my concerns in this is if there would be rules established for the vampire lore within the movie. And I'm glad that there mostly are. I mean, we know if they can go out in the sun, what kills them and how, and even what turns one person into a vampire. Now, I don't care what the rules turn out to be as long as that they're somewhat defined. So I'm happy that they clue us in as the story goes along. Now, just like with that insane Netflix action film Carter, this story is poo. But the reason to watch is really the action. Thankfully, this has even more going for it with the acting because they're intentionally funny and they're able to deliver characters that are enjoyable to watch. Mindless action is great, but when there are people that you like, it's so much better. This is just short of 2 hours, and it does feel long when the action dips. But lucky for us, there's very little downtime. The scenes move on to the next sequence without really spending much time showing us actions that were unnecessary or could be monotonous. Instead, we just typically get some little bit of dialogue that describes the actions that we weren't shown, and then it gets us back into the fun faster. So overall, Day Shift is ridiculous with a thin and fairly uninteresting story, but is filled with funny, subtle comedy and insane action pieces. The violence mixed with sarcasm works, especially when Jamie Foxx and Dave Franco are trading lines. Now, while this is mostly forgettable, it's a great bit of escapism and excitement while you watch. There's no sex or nudity, a ton of profanity, and just about non-stop violence. I give Day Shift 4 out of 5 couches. So what are some of your favorite vampire movies? It's been a bit since I've watched Night Watch and Day Watch, but those are really enjoyable, different takes on vampires. Let me know yours, though, in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.